Sand lifts from the Jezreel plain like breath from a tired horse. The palace courtyards shine with imported stone and imported gods, polished cedar doors, carved bulls, a queen with Sidonian vowels, whose necklaces clink like little thunder. If Baal owns the clouds, this nation has bought stock in the sky. Priests dance, politicians nod. The royal press releases promise rain soon. Then a man, in travel dust, walks into the frame. No entourage, no diagram, no 10-point plan. Just a sentence that lands like a bolt without lightning, as the Lord lives. There will be neither dew nor rain, except at my word. 1 Kings 17:1. In a culture that claims the weather is programmable, Elijah announces a power outage in heaven. Therefore the air grows brittle. But the palace doubles down on optics. More altars, more rituals, more speeches about resilience. Week 1, the fountains still splash. Month 3, the cisterns wear a ring like a tan line. Sheep ribs show through like ladders. The soil cracks into maps of a country no one wants to live in. Why a drought, not random anger? It's surgical. Baal's resume boasts storms and fertility. Therefore, God chooses the exact pressure point, the clouds. The challenge isn't petty, it's pastoral. When the heart trusts a false god, mercy sometimes turns off the faucet to reveal the lie. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. Elijah's name is a sermon. My God is Yahweh. He is not a lobbyist trying to tweak policy. He is a covenant messenger, delivering a wake-up to people who still sing old lyrics while streaming a new playlist in private. Therefore he speaks, but the nation blinks. The nervous laughter you hear on Carmel later. It starts now in hallway jokes and supply chain memos, in late-night monologues about that desert prophet. Let's slow the camera. The throne room glitters, but spiritual economies are already wobbling. When rain stops, everything political becomes religious, and everything religious becomes political. Farmers glare at the horizon. Nobles price barley like diamonds. Parents ration stories at bedtime so the children forget the word thirst. And somewhere between Samaria's monuments and Jezreel's stables, a single question hovers like heat. Who really runs the world? Therefore, God turns the volume down everywhere else to make room for a whisper later. But first, he keeps one servant alive on the thin edge of obedience. Elijah will not out-argue a nation. He will outlast it. Formation precedes confrontation. Before fire falls on a mountain, silence has to fall inside a man. You can almost feel the insecurity under the royal bravado. If your God is supposed to sling lightning, you schedule parades with big clouds on the banners. You edit the drought footage with soft filters. You redefine success so the graphs point up. But reality is stubborn. Wells do not take orders from PR. Wheat doesn't grow for slogans. Here's where the story comes close to your calendar. We also enthrone our storm gods' algorithms' brands, hustle the person who promises a shortcut. Therefore, we expect them to make it rain clients likes peace. But when nothing falls, we don't repent. We refresh the page. The biblical narrative refuses that loop. It suggests a more courageous move, ask. Whether the silence in your life is not abandonment, but invitation. Elijah's sentence rekeys the score of the nation. In a few words, he declares your contracts with false power cannot deliver you. That collision is both terrifying and kind. God is not playing to win a debate. He is rescuing a people from a God who can't keep his promises. Notice who doesn't change first the palace. Systems cling to the stories that keep them in charge. Ahab can trade prophets like cabinet members, but he cannot manufacture a cloud. Jezebel can import priests, but she cannot import dew. Therefore, the stage is set for a public test. But before we reach Carmel's flames, the narrative will slip out of town to a brook no one brags about and a prophet no one celebrates. The drought is not just a headline, it is a curriculum. Why would God do? This becomes, what if God is doing this for us? When strength hides behind spectacle, love sometimes removes the spectacle so we can recognize strength. The drought is not the end of the story. It is the only route to the whisper, the widow's table, the mountain of decision, and the mantle on a farmer's shoulders. So hold on, that opening image, dust rising skies, hard as brass, a prophet small against the geometry of a palace. If the storm god has lost the weather, all our clever idols will lose something too. That's not bad news. It's the painful mercy that makes room for rain that is real. Therefore Samaria cracks and Jezreel thirsts. But the living God is not finished. He will teach Elijah to live on breadcrumbs by a brook, then show a nation what fire and water obey. When God targets our proudest proofs and turns off what we thought we controlled, it's not spite, it's rescue. Name the storm god you trust and ask for the courage to trust the one who can both send fire and keep a life alive on a trickle. The map zooms out. A thin blue vein threads the hills east of the Jordan Wadi Cherith. No monuments, no markets, just a cut in the earth where water whispers to rock. God points Elijah there not to command centers or headlines, but to a ravine the sun forgets at noon. It's a strange strategy, hide the prophet when the nation needs a voice. Therefore he goes. Obedience is often less like a trumpet and more like a quiet left turn off the main road. He camps beside the brook, call it a classroom, with one teacher and two elements, water and waiting. Morning, beating wings. Ravens unclean in every Levitical chart arrive like black punctuation marks against the pale sky. Meat and bread in their beaks, grace wrapped in a delivery method no one would pick. You'd prefer angels in linen. You get scavengers on time. Therefore Elijah eats. But every swallow says, you are not your own source. Days settle into a liturgy, drink, receive, pray, listen. The prophet's body relaxes from flight. The cortisol unwinds. The soul, still carrying the echo of palace marble and street dust, learns the sound of water against stone. Elijah has called down a drought. Now the drought calls down his hurry. Big work made him public. Deeper work makes him quiet. And yet the waterline inches lower. First, it's a subtle change, a memory ring on the rock. Then the current turns thin, then threadbare, then something you can step over without wetting your ankle. Therefore, he watches the resource evaporate in slow motion. But God does not change the order. No new command arrives, no emergency thunder, just the invitation to keep trusting as the gauge drops. This is formation by attrition. The lesson is not only that God can send food by ravens, but that God can pace a life by dwindling streams. We prefer feast or famine dramatics. He trains us with just enough and not yet. The prophet who will one day call fire learns first to live on crumbs and sips. Courage grows best in droughts measured, not merely endured. Imagine Elijah's prayers at night. Are we good? Am I where I should be? No transcript is given, and that's the point. Cherith is not for quotes, it's for quiet. Some spaces in your life will never trend, never produce a viral line, never even be remembered except by you and God. They are not wasted. They are where you unlearn self-rescue. Notice the ravens. God bends categories to feed his servant. He doesn't ask the prophet to violate conscience. He violates expectations. The holy meets the ordinary through unlikely couriers, and the man who will confront kings learns to receive without controlling the packaging. Therefore, when the nation later needs mercy, Elijah will not confuse elegance with God's presence. The brook keeps shrinking, and the temptation rises. Do something, move yourself, fix it. Initiative is good. Panic is not. Cherith trains the difference. The rhythm holds provision. You can't orchestrate depletion. You can't deny and guidance that arrives on God's clock. When the last puddle reflects sky more than it gives drink, a new word finally comes. Go to Zarephath. That name hits odd. North, Phoenicia, Jezebel's neighborhood. If Baal is the storm god, Sidon is one of his home stadiums. Therefore, the route forward leads not into friendly country, but into contested territory. But the prophet who learned to wait can now walk without flinching. The classroom did its work. Before we shoulder the pack, sit once more with the brook stones. What if God placed you at Cherith, not to punish you, but to detox you from the myth that you are your own supply? What if the unglamorous season is how he protects you from a future platform that would crush you if you took it hollow? The public will remember Carmel's fire. Heaven remembers Cherith's quiet. For leaders, artists, parents, students, the principle stands. When your stream runs thin, you are not necessarily failing. You may be learning to follow a whisper instead of a forecast. You may be switching from outcomes you can tally to obedience you can't quantify. You may be graduating from my plan, with God's help, to God's plan, with my trust. Elijah rolls his bed, looks at the nearly dry stones, and smiles a little. He is lighter than when he arrived, not because the drought is over, but because he knows who owns the clouds, and more importantly, who carries him when the clouds are empty. The ravens cut one last arc across the morning, and the prophet steps toward a widow's door. Cherith seasons narrow your options so your trust can widen. When resources taper and the next step isn't flashy, don't despise the ravine. Receive weight, listen, so when the word go comes, you're light enough to move. North, past vineyards gone to dust, past shrines where wooden eyes stare at an empty sky. Elijah walks into Phoenicia, Jezebel's homeland, where storm god banners fade in the sun, like promises that didn't pay out. God has a sense of drama. Send the prophet into Baal's backyard to learn that mercy can bloom in enemy soil. At Zarephath's gate, a woman gathers sticks. Not much of a meet-cute, no violins, no warm bread smell, just a tired mother and 2 handfuls of kindling. Elijah asks for water, then for bread. The request hits like a bill she can't pay. I have a little flour in a jar, she tells him, and a little oil in a jug. I'm making a last meal for my boy, and me then will wait. There's a silence where pity could live. Elijah steps into faith instead. Not bravado. A gentle future tense, make a small cake for me first, then for you. The promise carries a timestamp. Until rain returns, the jar won't empty, the jug won't fail. It's a strange math give when you have almost nothing. But scarcity can sharpen courage. She bakes. Sizzle of batter, quiet scrape of a wooden spoon against clay. 2 sets of eyes watching the rim of a jar, like it's a horizon. The boy eats. She eats. Elijah eats. The sun goes down, and the jar looks like it always looks, ordinary, unphotogenic, not a billboard miracle. The wonder is in the repetition. Tomorrow, there's enough again. Then the day after. Not overflowing, just sufficient, like a heartbeat you forget to brag about. Home turns into a small sanctuary. Simple meals. Sabbath silence. A guest room that smells like olive and dust, conversations in the glow of a lamp. The drought rages in headlines, but inside these walls, hope rehearses quiet lines. Faith here isn't fireworks. It's 1,000 tiny loyalties bake again, trust again, thank again. Oil, flour, breath. Then the room goes cold. The boy's cough becomes fever. The fever becomes stillness. And stillness becomes that black-edged moment when a mother realizes the world just misplaced her reason to keep living. Scarcity sharpened courage. Death slices it open. Grief reaches for explanation and grabs the closest thing that changed. Man of God, did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son? It's not theology class. It's the sound a breaking heart makes. Elijah doesn't argue. He gathers the little body, climbs the stairs, and places the boy on his bed. The prophet who has faced kings now faces silence more terrible than any throne room. He stretches himself over the child once, twice again, and prays the only honest prayer he has, Lord my God, let this child's life return. There's no technique here, no secret formula, just proximity and petition. Elijah's weight over the boy is not magic. It's solidarity. He is laying his whole self across the chasm between breath and no breath, saying with his body what his soul begs with words, "Take my warmth." Give him yours. Minutes lengthen like shadows, and then something you only notice when you've waited for it, a cough, a startled inhale, lungs that choose again. Elijah spills down the stairs with the boy alive in his arms. The widow's scream turns into laughter, mid-sound, the way winter occasionally flips to spring in a single afternoon rain. She clutches her son, then looks at the prophet as if she is seeing him for the first time. "Now I know," she says, "not because the jar kept giving, but because the breath returned." Daily bread trained her hope. Resurrection confirmed its aim. Why did God stage all of this in Sidon? Because the story was never about borders. It was always about the heart of God and the reach of his mercy. He sends his prophet to a foreign kitchen to teach Israel and us that covenant love is not a gated community. The storm god's country cannot keep out rain when the time comes. It cannot keep out compassion now. Also notice the order of Elijah's education. Before Mount Carmel's spectacle, he learns Cherith's dependence and Zarephath's empathy. Authority that does not pass through grief often curdles into performance. But the man who has wept with a mother carries a different fire up the mountain. He knows God's power is not just for showdowns. It is for the places where breath needs returning, and bills need paying, and hope needs a room. The jar keeps pouring. The jug keeps tipping. Outside, dust still writes its dry poems in the streets. Inside, a widow and her son eat the next meal they didn't think they'd see, and a prophet stares at a boy that death couldn't keep. Elijah will call down fire soon, but first he has learned to hold a life and ask for breath. The nation will cheer spectacle. Heaven has already applauded compassion. If you're watching this with your own handful of sticks here, obedience in scarcity is not naivete. It's participation in a story where supply follows surrender. And if you're holding a grief, you can't label this scene won't short-circuit your pain with slogans. It simply lays beside you and prays that life returns in God's timing, in God's way. Sometimes the miracle is daily bread. Sometimes it is breath. Often it is both. God trains us to trust with enough for today, then teaches us to love by entering another's grief. Don't despise small obedience. Don't rush past honest lament. In both you'll discover the God who multiplies oil and returns breath. Wind scours the ridge of Carmel, a spine between sea and plain. The nation gathers like a jury, farmers, in cracked sandals, officials in polished leather, 450 prophets in Baal blue. Another crowd for Asherah, the king's entourage gleaming like a threat. Elijah stands alone, dust on his cloak, the kind of small that makes the question louder. How long will you waver between two opinions? Kings 18:21. It's not a taunt, it's triage. A heart split can't hold water. Therefore a test. 2 bulls, 2 altars, no matches. The God who answers by fire, he is God. Baal's team picks first, carves, arranges circles. Morning heat climbs. They chant, sway, call louder. No voice, no answer. No one pays the invoice. Therefore they escalate, cutting themselves, blood mixing with dust frenzy, trying to force a miracle. But the storm god can't even spark kindling on his home turf. Elijah waits. Noon slides toward evening, the hour when sacrifices glow on Israel's altars, if Israel remembered. He calls the people near. The camera moves in. Stones, 12 of them, 1 for each tribe. A trench. Wood stacked, bull laid out. Then water pitchers and pitchers until the trench becomes a moat and the sacrifice shines like a dare. If this is theater, it's terrible stagecraft. If this is covenant, it's brilliant. The altar is rebuilt before the fire falls. The prayer is short enough to memorize and humble enough to mean. Not performance petition. Answer me, Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you are God and that you have turned their hearts back. Therefore the sky answers with fire that licks water, like its paper that eats stone, like its bread that leaves a crater where wood used to be. But the miracle's target isn't the bull, it's the people. Knees hit ground. Mouths remember an old anthem, "The Lord, He is God." Pause the dust, freeze the flame. This is not pagan fireworks. It's a restoration of order, altar, then fire repentance, then rain. The nation wanted weather. God wanted worship. Carmel is not a magic trick to humiliate competitors. It's a surgical sign to heal a divided heart. The fire does what rebukes and speeches couldn't. It recenters a people battered by drought and slogans. Elijah moves quickly, not hungry for spectacle, but for alignment. False prophets have trafficked in blood. Therefore justice lands hard. It's a difficult scene heavy with ancient covenant law and a culture gnarled by state-backed idolatry. Modern ears may flinch, and we should feel the weight. The story is not prescribing vigilante faith. It is describing a national turning point where corrupt spiritual power loses its microphone. Now the camera finds the horizon. There is a sound of rushing rain, Elijah says, before a cloud appears. Therefore he climbs higher, crouches, head between knees, the posture of labor. Prayer midwives the promise. He sends his servant to look toward the sea. Nothing. Again. Nothing. 6 times. Nothing. But on the 7th, a hand-sized cloud, the smallest headline imaginable, moving like mercy. That's enough. The sky darkens the way joy sometimes does, slow then suddenly. Wind arrives like relief. Drops prick skin that has forgotten them. Fields lift their faces. Ahab's chariot bolts toward Jezreel. Elijah runs ahead, cloak snapping, a man carried by the God who carries weather in his pockets. Why does this matter for us? Because Carmel reframes success. The win wasn't flame. It was hearts turned back. The rain wasn't the goal. It was the fruit. Our age worships spectacle, viral spikes, big stages, sizzle reels. But the God of Elijah aims smaller and deeper. Rebuild the altar. Tell the truth, pray until a cloud the size of a hand becomes a storm of mercy. Also notice the pacing. All day of noise, then a minute of fire, then hours of prayer before rain. Therefore don't confuse long delays for divine absence. But don't mistake sudden results for the end of formation. Jezebel will write a letter. Fear will stalk a tired prophet. The story isn't over because the crowd cheered. After every public victory, the soul needs a cave where whispers heal adrenaline. Still today, let yourself stand in the rain. Remember the sound a nation exhaling after years of clenched drought. Remember the altar rebuilt stone by stone, the people close enough to see water drip from wood. The prayer that asked for hearts, not headlines. If Baal owned the forecast, he would have delivered months ago. He didn't. The living God did on his timing for their turning. Therefore Carmel stands in the memory as a hinge from drought to downpour, from divided to decided. But the truest hinge is inside Elijah, the man who now must learn that fire cannot keep a soul alive. Only the low voice on a mountain can do that. We'll go there next. For now, let the last image be this. A prophet running through rain he didn't manufacture under clouds. His prayer helped welcome toward a city that still needs more than weather. Rebuild your altar before you demand your rain. Ask for a heart turned back. Not just a problem turned off. Then pray steady hand-sized faith is enough for God to fill a sky. Night rain turns roads to ribboned mud. Jezreel smells like wet dust and horse sweat banners slapping in the wind. If this were a movie that worshipped momentum, the credits would roll after Carmel fire rain prophet sprinting like a headline. Instead, the story takes a turn only survivors recognize the moment after victory when the bill for adrenaline comes due. A messenger finds Elijah. Not applause, a letter. It is short venom folded into courtesy, a vow by Jezebel that by this time tomorrow he will be as dead as her prophets. No chariot, no sword, just a sentence delivered to the nervous system. And it works. Fear doesn't argue, it accelerates. Therefore, Elijah runs. North to south, Elijah pounds the miles until the map runs out at Beersheba. His servant stays. The prophet keeps going one day into the wilderness where shrubs are the only architecture. Under a broom tree, he collapses into the sentence many of us have whispered after our loudest wins, "I'm no better than my fathers. Take my life." The man who outran a chariot now can't outrun the spiral. This is not drama for attention. This is the human body cashing checks written on borrowed hormones, sleep debt, calorie debt, safety debt. You can be used mightily and still be mortal. God answers like a good clinician and a father. No lecture. No where is your faith. An angel touches Elijah. Get up and eat. Bread on hot stones, water in a jar. He eats and sleeps again. Another touch. Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. Therefore strength returns not through fireworks, but through a nap and a meal. Sacred, ordinary things. Love that adjusts the pace to the pulse. Take in the dignity here. God does not shame a tired servant. He feeds him. He does not confuse exhaustion with rebellion. He treats the right problem. In modern terms, your burnout is not solved by a new productivity system. It's healed by sleep nourishment, honesty, and presence. Elijah's story refuses the lie that spiritual people don't have bodies. He is given color back in his cheeks before he is given clarity back in his calling. 40 days later, a generative number Elijah reaches Horeb, the mountain of covenant memory. But our scene still belongs under that broom tree, because that's where many of us live between Sundays and headlines. You thought Jezebel would send soldiers. She sent a message. Sometimes the loudest enemy is a text that lands at the perfect cruel moment. Sometimes the knife is in a calendar invite with your name misspelled. Sometimes it's the ache of after you did the thing, after you proved yourself, after you were brave, and the silence lets every old fear find the microphone. Notice Elijah's confession. I'm no better than my fathers. The comparison trap springs even on prophets. He wanted to be the one who finally flipped the nation for good. But zeal without rest becomes self-salvation in nicer clothes. God's mercy at Cherith taught dependence. Jezebel's letter exposes the residue of hero fantasy. And God answers by making the prophet lie down. There's also the isolation. Elijah leaves his servant and walks alone. When despair wants to deepen it, subtracts witnesses. The broom tree becomes a private courtroom with a biased judge and no defense attorney. Into that court, God sends bread. Grace interrupts the monologue. The angel doesn't wait for Elijah to feel different. He feeds him until Elijah can walk to where a whisper will do the surgery speeches can't. For pastors, creators, parents, students, anyone carrying weight, here is your permission. Slip signed by Scripture. When you are devastated after a public success, you are not broken. You are human. Eat, sleep. Let someone touch your shoulder and say, it's too much for you alone. The God who answered by fire is not embarrassed to answer by food. Jezebel's letter is brilliant as intimidation because it weaponizes tomorrow by this time. Anxiety lives on the horizon line. The Spirit brings Elijah back to now, eat now, sleep now, walk one step. Between the letter and the mountain, there is a practice small obediences that keep a person alive until truth can reframe the threat. The story dignifies that middle. It is not filler. It is faith with a fork and a pillow. We will follow Elijah into the cave, next the wind, the quake, the fire, and the whisper that writes a new strategy. But don't rush past the broom tree. A nation's future hung on a nap and a meal given to a prophet who wanted to die. If that feels too ordinary to be holy, that's exactly why we needed this chapter. After big wins, plan for low valleys. When fear rides in on a sentence answer with rest food and honest prayers, God meets burned-out people with gentleness, not scolding, and he will feed you on the way to the whisper. The mountain holds its breath. Rock remembers footsteps older than kings. Moses prints somewhere in its ribs. Elijah finds a cave and fits himself into the dark like a spent match. 40 days of walking leave a quiet that even fear respects. Then a word finds him. What are you doing here, Elijah? It is not ignorance. It is invitation to speak the wound aloud. He answers the way exhausted people do with math and history and isolation. I've been very zealous. They've torn down altars. They've killed prophets. I'm the only one left. And now they're after me. It sounds airtight because pain always brings spreadsheets of evidence. Therefore, God calls him outside. But first, the mountain must roll through its catalog of power. Wind tears the cliff's shards skitter like knives. Therefore, Elijah braces. But the Lord is not in the wind. Earth shakes, the cave belly growls. But the Lord is not in the quake. Fire rakes the ridge, the kind that Carmel remembers. But the Lord is not in the fire. Then the sound thin enough to slip through armor, the low whisper. The text doesn't say what the whisper sounds like. Maybe that's the point. It is shaped to fit one soul at a time. Elijah pulls his cloak over his face. Strength that could crush him chooses to comfort him. Power that could perform chooses to speak. Therefore, the same question returns. What are you doing here? But this time it lands softer like a hand on a shoulder. Elijah repeats his case, but the edges are rounding. The whisper doesn't debate. It directs. Go back the way you came. Not a retreat, a redeployment. 3 assignments unfurl like threads of a plan bigger than one man. Anoint Hazael over Aram, anoint Jehu over Israel, and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, as prophet in your place. Therefore justice will come through kings you don't control, and a successor you will nurture. But the change will be paced, not flashed process, not just pyrotechnics. And then the line that unhooks the prophet from despair's lie I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal. Elijah is not the last candle in a cathedral going dark. He is a lamp among thousands covered by fear, but still burning. Isolation shrinks when you hear names you don't know exist. What does this do to a heart? It reintroduces the prophet to reality with mercy. God validates the pain. Yes, violence has been real. Yes, altars have been toppled. Yes, threats are not imaginary. Therefore, he answers not by inflating Elijah's heroism, but by distributing agency. Kings will play their part. A young farmer will carry your mantle. You will not be the end of the story. You will be a hinge inside it. This is a different kind of miracle. Not fire from heaven, but a plan that keeps working when you're asleep. Not rain on fields, but rain on a mind that's been droughted by fear. For leaders wired for emergency, this whisper can feel like anticlimax. But the most strategic moves often arrive wrapped in ordinary verbs: go anoint, appoint, find. Notice also the geography in the command. Go back the way you came. The road that witnessed panic will now become a pilgrimage. The same stretches of scrub and stone that heard your despair will hear your humming. God doesn't always change the route. He changes who you are on it. The whisper makes room for paradox. Elijah is still in danger, yet he is safe enough to walk. Jezebel still rules a palace, yet her days are numbered in a timetable the prophet won't own. Elijah still feels alone, yet a student's name now waits on his lips. This is how hope often arrives, not with the removal of all opponents, but with the insertion of purpose stronger than fear. Elijah adjusts his cloak, memorizes 3 names, and turns to descend. He is not taller than before, but he is steadier. He will not outrun chariots today. He will outwalk despair. Somewhere in the Jordan Valley, a young man is driving a team of oxen hands, rough with ordinary. Soon there will be a mantle in the air. God's answer to your loud crisis might be a quiet assignment. Don't chase the wind. Listen for the whisper that gives you names, steps, and the assurance you're not the only one. Then go back the way you came changed. The Jordan Valley breathes like a green ribbon through brown hills. Sun climbs. Oxen lean into the collar hooves, thudding a steady drum. 24 of them, in 12 pairs, chew the field into furrows, and behind the 12th pair walks a man whose hands know splinters and seasons Elisha son of Shaphat. Not a monk. Not a prince. A farmer mid-shift with dirt on his wrists and a to-do list in his head. Down the road comes a figure sized by silence. Elijah, fresh from Horeb, still smelling faintly of desert and decision, doesn't stage an interview. He doesn't hand over a scroll of job description bullet points. He just steps close enough for shadow to touch and lets the mantle slip from his shoulders to Elisha's. Wool kisses sweat. The field goes quiet the way a heart does when a word finds it. No voice from clouds, no dove, no fire. A garment heavy with story drapes a man who was not in the market for a new life. Therefore he runs after the prophet. But he doesn't pose for a photo. He asks for permission to kiss his father and mother. This is not stalling. It's sealing. Some callings are answered best with honor. Elijah's reply is simple, the kind that respects agency. Go back, think what I've done to you. No pressure tactics, no mystical threats about missing your destiny. The mantle doesn't erase choice. It clarifies it. Elisha looks at the oxen, the wood, the field, the world that has fed him and would have kept feeding him, and decides to make leaving irreversible. He slaughters the team and boils the meat over the very yokes that used to pull his days forward. Friends gather. Smoke rises. The farm becomes a farewell table. Burning yokes isn't about drama. It's about direction. He is not auditioning for attention. He is removing the backup plan. Inheritance and expectation whisper, you can always return. The fire answers, I won't need to, therefore he turns. Servant Scripture's stark phrasing, then he arose and went after Elijah and assisted him. 2 Kings 3:11 recalls that he poured water on Elijah's hands. But service here is not small, it's schooling. The quiet curriculum begins. Walk, watch, fetch, listen, ask, carry, pray, repeat. Imagine the next months. Elisha rises before dawn, not to harness oxen, but to pack a prophet's satchel. He times his steps to Elijah's stride. He learns when the older man wants questions and when he needs silence. He hears how to speak to widows, how to stand before kings, how to wait by rivers. There are no cameras for this, no applause loops. Apprenticeship is not an internship with swag. It is a long obedience that trains a soul to fit a calling without tearing it. Why Elisha? The text doesn't give a resume beyond his family and field. Maybe that's the lesson. God delights in interrupting ordinary competence with holy purpose. Plow straight long enough and heaven might trust you with a mantle. The farmer already knows seasons, patience, muscle memory, small faithfulness, all the raw material prophecy requires. Elijah doesn't look for someone loud. He looks for someone steady. And why the mantle? In ancient imagination, it's more than a coat. It is identity office weight. When prophets wrap themselves, they hide and declare, at the same time veiling self-revealing assignment. Draped over Elisha, it says, you will not just do what Elijah did. You will carry who he was to the people, yet in the way God shapes you. The later double portion request will not be greed for fireworks, but the firstborn's share of responsibility to shepherd a household called Israel. There is tenderness in the handoff. Elijah will not live forever, and he knows it. Many leaders hoard the stage. He throws his future at a farmer and trusts God with timing. This is what the whisper at Horeb produced: a man retooled from solo hero to father of a next generation. Public victories prove God's power. Private investments prove your transformation. Modern parallels write themselves. Maybe your mantle is an industry you've learned to love, a team you've kept alive through lean quarters, a class roster, a family business, a neighborhood. Who is plowing near you with steady hands, who doesn't yet see themselves as anything but ordinary. Could you let part of your story rest on their shoulders and teach them to wear it without drowning? And if you're Elisha watching your oxen steam in the cool morning, as the fire takes, the yokes take heart. Calling rarely begins with clarity. It begins with closeness. Stay near the one who threw the mantle. Ask for small tasks. Listen between the lines. There will be a day of parting waters and chariots, yes, but there will be hundreds of unfilmed abysses before that, when you learn to be a person whose compassion keeps pace with power. The scene closes with a movement. Two figures on a road, one slightly ahead, one half a step behind, dust braiding around their ankles. The field returns to birds and breeze. The ashes cool. Somewhere a widow will need oil. Somewhere a general will need humbling. Somewhere a city will need eyes to see fire. But first a servant will pour water on a mentor's hands, and love will learn the long route. Burn the yokes that keep you half committed. Calling grows in the shadow of faithful service. Close the back door, choose proximity over platform, and let hidden years fit your soul to the weight you'll one day carry. The camera lowers from palaces to porches. If Elijah's ministry felt like thunderheads, Elisha's often sounds like a front door opening. Power goes house to house, bill to bill, grief to comfort. The first knock is desperate, a widow with 2 boys and a ledger that won't forgive her. Creditors circle. The law can make slaves out of sons. She has one small asset, a jar that feels like an apology. Elisha doesn't lecture about budgeting. He asks a different inventory. What do you have? Then he edits scarcity with community. Borrow vessels from neighbors. Empty, not a few. Therefore, a private miracle begins in a public network, doors shut, faith pours. Oil kisses clay thin streams, becoming fat, glistening hope stacking in borrowed shapes. She fills cells, pays lives. Mercy here looks like solvency, and holiness smells faintly of olive. Next door, hospitality grows into architecture. A great woman of Shunem notices the prophet's weary gait and builds a room bed table chair lamp. Therefore, her home becomes a layover of grace. She expects nothing, but God loves returning favors nobody asked for. A child arrives in due season, laughter rethreading a marriage. Years later, laughter stops. The boy's head hurts. Then breath does. The room that once held rest now holds a stillness that makes the walls lean. She saddles a donkey and rides past explanations. It is well, she says to people who want a tidy grief. At the house, Elisha sends Gehazi with a staff procedure without presence. No change. Then the prophet enters the small room that changed his life and lies on the boy, eyes to eyes, mouth to mouth, hands to hands. It's not technique. It's solidarity. Again, the same posture Elijah learned in Zarephath. Warmth returns in waves, sneezes like thunderclaps in miniature until a mother is holding laughter with tears on it. The thread through these scenes isn't spectacle. It's attention. God's kingdom moves at household scale. Debts canceled. Guest rooms consecrated. Children restored. The miracles are not smaller than national wonders. They are the future insured families, stabilized compassion, institutionalized in the muscle memory of a town. And the warnings are small scale too. Gehazi's grasping heart, the temptation to turn ministry into merch. Greatness here is measured in quiet servings and doors left unlocked for prophets and widows alike. We love Carmel because fire is photogenic. We need Shunem because love is practical. Elisha's mantle weighs heavy, but not on stages, on stairwells, kitchens, and back of rooms, where faith sets a table at normal height and waits for breath to come back. If your life feels too ordinary for God to notice, this chapter disagrees. He keeps office hours where bills come due and kids get sick, and neighbors lend Tupperware. Bring him your jar. Borrow your neighbor's faith. Build a small room for the sacred ordinary to rest. The Spirit's power isn't only for headlines. It settles accounts, furnishes spare rooms, and returns breath. Start where you live, count what you have. Invite others into the miracle, and make space for God to rest in your everyday. A convoy rolls into Israel like a parade that lost its map horses, lacquered with sweat banners, snapping chests stuffed with silver and outfits for a small nation. At the center rides Naaman, commander of Aram's army, the man king's toast when borders hold. Power sits well on his shoulders. What doesn't sit well is the secret under his armor, a skin disease that writes shame where medals should be. He didn't come for theology. He came for a cure and for ceremony that feels worthy of a general. His referral came from a voice nobody in his palace usually hears, a captive Hebrew girl who worked in his house. She believed the God of her people still pays attention. Faith sometimes travels in the pockets of the overlooked. Letters are exchanged. Panic at Israel's court. Am I God to heal and give life? And finally, Naaman arrives at Elisha's door. He expects the prophet to come out, wave a hand, chant a line, stage a scene. Instead, a messenger. One sentence. Go wash in the Jordan 7 times. No choreography. No invoice. Just a simple river and a specific number. The general's face hardens. Pride flares because simplicity feels like an insult. If healing is too easy, how do we prove we deserve it? Naaman storms off, naming prettier rivers back home. His men ride behind him in that tense silence that follows when the boss is wrong. But nobody wants to die for saying it. Then, one of them tries honesty with honor. If he had asked for something huge, you would have done it. Why not try the small thing? So the convoy turns toward muddy water. The Jordan is not impressive this time of year. Dragonflies scribble on its surface. Reeds gossip. Naaman steps down, ankle, calf, knee, like a man wading into an argument he's losing. Once, twice, 3 times. Mud presses between his toes like a child's prank. 4, 5, 6. If God meant to humiliate him, this would be perfect. But God is not in the business of humiliation. He is in the business of humility. 7. Skin that told the story of decay now tells a different story, newness, like a field after rain. Naaman looks at his hands the way people look at good news they didn't script. He has enough imagination to realize the point wasn't Jordan versus Damascus, technique versus talent. The point was surrender versus self. He rides back to the prophet's house, not as a buyer, but as a man who has nothing to trade except thanks. Elisha refuses the gifts. This is not a marketplace. This was mercy. Naaman asks for 2 mule loads of Israel's dirt, a way to remember the place where he bowed. Then promises to worship the living God back home, asking for grace in the messy realities of a soldier's calendar. The miracle doesn't erase his job. It reorients his heart inside it. But the chapter adds a warning in a single name, Gehazi. He runs after the convoy, spins a lie about guests, collects silver and outfits, and hides them like trophies. He is a cautionary tale of a soul near holy things, but hungry for side deals. Ministry without contentment metastasizes into manipulation. The disease that left Naaman's skin settles on Gehazi's judgment, tailored to the appetite that birthed it. The river still runs. The lesson keeps traveling. God heals a foreign general because God isn't building a museum. He's building a kingdom that keeps surprising insiders. The hero of the story besides God is a girl with no platform, a servant with courage, a river with no glamour. That's how grace likes to work, through voices we overlook, through tasks we think are beneath us, through steps so small you're tempted to skip them. Where does this land for us? We all bring convoys to God. Achievements, strategies, proofs. We should be taken seriously. We want a personalized ritual, something that flatters our sense of specialness. but often the prescription is small, repeatable obedience. 7 dips in a river. Pray daily with your spouse. Apologize first. Take the meds. See the counselor. Rest. Forgive. Give away what you can't stop counting. The ego hates these because they don't distinguish us. They heal us. If you lead, note the servant's bravery. Good teams save leaders from their egos by telling the truth in time. If you suffer, note the captive girl's integrity. She advocated for the man whose army had crushed her people. That's supernatural love, and it changed history in one household. If you minister, note Elisha's refusal to monetize the miracle. Keeping grace free protects the message and your heart. Naaman mounts up lighter than he arrived, not just in disease, but in delusion. He came a commander. He leaves a witness. Somewhere downstream, kids splash in the Jordan, ignorant of the quiet revolution that just happened in its shallows. That's fine. The best miracles often leave the landscape looking ordinary. The change is in the man who rides away, skin-clean heart, bowed pockets still full, hands open. Healing often hides in humble steps your pride resists. Don't wait for a show. Do the simple thing God asked again and again until grace has the last word. Night lays a velvet lid over Dothan. Cook fires thread thin lines of smoke doors. Thud the town exhales. Somewhere in a modest house, Elisha sleeps like a man used to problems arriving before breakfast. His servant wakes first. He steps into the cool and rubs his eyes and freezes. Torches ring the hills like a necklace of teeth. Horses snort. Iron whispers. Aramean troops have wrapped the town in a fist. Panic does fast math enemies, equals many us equals 2. He bolts inside. Alas, my master, what shall we do? It's the right question in the wrong key. Fear turns questions into sirens. Faith turns them into doors. Elisha rises without hurry the way people do who have practiced looking twice at the world. He glances toward the ridge and smiles at something his friend can't see. Do not be afraid. He says not as a scold, but as a welcome. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Therefore he prays a prayer as short as a breath. Lord, open his eyes that he may see. The world blooms. Hills that seem to carry only hostile steel now blaze with chariots of fire horses, like lightning in harness ranks upon ranks of the invisible cavalry of God. The servant's lungs come back online. His pulse drops from thunder to rain. Courage is not the disappearance of threat. It is the arrival of perspective. The armies did not materialize. They were always there. Sight lagged, that's all. Then, strategy. Elisha does not yell. Charge! He asks for mercy with consequence. As the Arameans advance, he prays again. Strike this people with blindness. They stumble, not sightless, but disoriented, unable to read what's in front of them. Elisha walks out, as if nothing unusual is happening. This is not the way. Follow me. And the enemy follows a prophet into the capital they came to terrorize. Inside Samaria, the king is giddy with the power reversal. Shall I strike them down? He asks, sword warming in his hand. The prophet cuts through the adrenaline with a different kind of command: feed them. Set bread and water before them. Let them eat. Let them go home. Therefore a banquet lands where a battle wanted to be, and men who came to spill blood leave with crumbs in their beards, carrying a story no one back in Aram will believe. Peace for a time follows. Mercy changes the map in ways statistics can't chart. Raids, pause, borders, breathe mothers, sleep a little deeper. Elisha's nonviolent imagination doesn't deny evil. It defangs it long enough for sanity to return. The victory isn't a body count. It's a recipe: open eyes, confuse harm. Feed enemies, send them away different than they arrived. Zoom out. This chapter teaches 2 kinds of sight. The first is vertical seeing, that you are not alone, that invisible help stands where you feared only absence. The second is ethical, seeing your enemy as a table guest, not a target when God hands you the power to choose. Open his eyes is a prayer for courage. Feed them is a command for character. Together, they keep a soul from becoming what it fights. Where does this land for us? We wake to news rings around our towns, alerts, threats, headlines that sell panic by the pound. Our nervous systems sprint before our feet leave the bed. Therefore, we need Elisha's habit look twice. Pray for sight, not just solutions. Ask to see the resources already present, friends, mentors, truths learned in smaller storms, the Spirit's quiet proximity. And when you find yourself with leverage over those who meant you harm, a critique that will go viral, a chance to fire without cause, a rumor you could confirm, feed them instead. Mercy is not naivete when commanded by God. It's strategy that keeps your own soul human. Also note what Elisha does not do. He doesn't deny the army. He doesn't call the fear silly. He doesn't say just believe. He adds information: there is more here than you think. Faith is not pretending the hill is empty. It is recognizing the hill is crowded with threats, yes, but with fire that does not burn houses, only hubris. And with that recognition, you can choose an action that honors God's heart rather than your adrenaline. As the sun climbs, the servant keeps glancing at the hills, smiling at a private sky. He will never see mornings the same. The prophet returns to his tea like a man whose office hours are generosity. Somewhere in Aram, soldiers try to explain the strangest dinner of their lives to wives who touch their faces and laugh because their men came home on time. The day moves on. The lesson doesn't. Eyes to see, hands to feed. A city safer not because it killed, but because it loved when it could have killed. It's a different kind of security, less dramatic on posters, sturdier at 3 a.m. Ask God to upgrade your sight before He upgrades your circumstances. When surrounded, look twice. When empowered, feed your enemy. Heaven's chariots aren't for your swagger. They're for your courage to choose mercy. Famine doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It moves in quietly. Sweeps out shelves, thins, faces, teaches mothers new math with old bread. Samaria's gates close against Aram's siege, and the city begins to eat its hope. Prices go absurd silver for donkey heads' fortunes, for a handful of seed husks. The streets learn to look away. The palace learns to tear robes in private. The king blames Elisha because blame is the only cheap thing left. At the war, Manuel, Elisha's words sound insane against the gnawing. About this time tomorrow, fine flour will sell cheap in the gate. Therefore a captain laughs cynicism dressed as realism. Even if the Lord made windows in heaven, but windows are not the hard part for the maker of sky. Belief is, the prophet doesn't explain. He simply draws a line, you'll see it, but you won't eat it. Cut to the city's edge, 4 men with leprosy, outcasts, to whom famine is old news. Between starving inside and risking death outside, they choose outside. If we sit here, we die. If we go to the camp, we might live. That's not bravado. It's math with courage. Therefore they hobble toward Aram's tents, under a sky that offers nothing but starlight, and find everything but soldiers. Silence. Tents yawning open like surprised mouths. Cook fires still warm, pots singing to themselves, jewelry asleep on blankets. God has done what armies cannot measure, amplified footsteps into thunder in enemy ears. Fear did the rest. The camp is a feast frozen mid-bite. The 4 eat, drink, laugh, the brittle laugh of men who don't trust joy anymore. Then they start stashing silver in holes like kids with stolen cookies. Mid-burial conscience clears its throat. We are not doing right. This is a day of good news, if we keep silent. Shame doesn't move them, grace does. Grace always wants company. They limp back through the dark to the gate and shout history awake. Skeptics deploy a test patrol. Rumor becomes report. Report becomes stampede. The city floods the abandoned siege like a river remembering gravity. And the price, exactly as promised. Flour cheap, barley ordinary, a marketplace that sounds like laughter. The captain who mocked the windows in heaven keeps the gate that day. The surge of starving joy does what no enemy could, it tramples him. He sees the miracle and doesn't taste it. A hard mercy, but not a surprise, the prophet had said. What is the lesson? That deliverance often gallops on the legs of the marginalized. The first evangelists of salvation are 4 men whose names history did not keep. The people who couldn't enter the city become the people the city cannot live without. When God writes comedy after tragedy, he loves to cast the overlooked in starring roles. Also, sometimes the next faithful move is not a sermon, but a step. The lepers did not pray fire. They walked into the possibility that mercy might meet them. Faith is frequently practical. If we sit here, we die. Stand up. Try the gate. Check the camp. Make the call. Send the resume. See a counselor. Confess the habit. God often turns to floodgates, what we bump with a trembling hand. And the captain, he teaches the cost of cultivated cynicism. Sarcasm can sound like intelligence during famine, but it withers when plenty returns. It guards gates, but cannot enter joy. A heart that only trusts scarcity may get to see abundance without tasting it. The story does not gloat, it warns. Don't let clever doubt keep you outside the feast you prayed for. Zoom to us. We live with headlines that sell seed shortages, shutdowns, systems stretched to snapping. Therefore, the prophet's voice feels naive. But the pattern holds. God can evacuate an enemy camp without a sword swung. He can change the math by morning. He can use the least likely messengers to tip a city from despair to distribution. Maybe your task is to be one of them, to bring news to share, to refuse to hoard the good you've discovered. Even now, God is teaching some of us to turn around halfway through burying treasure, to run back to the gate we were excluded from and shout, "There's enough to watch and enjoy," as skeptics send scouts, then join the surge ourselves, distributing bread. We did not bake mercy, we did not manufacture. Let the sound at the end of this chapter be sacks opening coins, clinking children chewing the city exhaling. Let the memory be 4 men laughing honest laughter, because they did not keep the good news to themselves. When despair narrows your world to sit and die, take the step you can and share what you find. God loves to root deliverance through overlooked people and simple courage, turning a night of famine into a morning of mercy. Dawn rinses the Jordan Valley clean. 4 stations mark the itinerary like beads. On a farewell rope, Gilgal, Bethel, Jericho, Jordan. Elijah walks as if he knows the map of his last day by heart. Elisha keeps half a step behind, trying to memorize a gate he will soon miss. At each stop, sons of the prophets whisper news that tastes like metal. Do you know the Lord will take your master today? He says he knows. He asks them to keep quiet. Grief needs room to breathe without commentary. At the river's lip, Elijah rolls up his mantle the way a father might roll a keepsake before handing it to a son. He strikes the water. It parts like a curtain trained to obey ancient cues. They cross on dry stones that glitter like memory. On the other bank, a final kindness. Ask what I shall do for you before I am taken. Elisha doesn't ask for comfort or clarity or a lighter workload. He asks for the firstborn's share, a double portion of your spirit. Not twice the fireworks, the heir's responsibility for a household called Israel. You've asked a hard thing, Elijah says, not scolding honest. If you see me when I'm taken, it shall be so. Therefore the exam is love's attention. No tricks, just stay near, eyes open. They walk and talk the most ordinary verbs at the edge of the most extraordinary moment. Then sound before sight, a wind builds that doesn't belong to weather. A chariot of fire horses of fire, the same imagery that once ringed Dothan's hills, arrives like a royal escort. It doesn't scoop Elijah like a carnival ride. It cleaves the space between them, holy distance glowing with heat. A whirlwind gathers the prophet as gently as a midwife gathers a child. Cloak flutters. Sand leaps. Silence bends. My father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. Elisha's cry is a thesis in one breath. Israel's true defense has never been iron and strategy. It has been the word of God carried by frail men who loved him. The nation's cavalry is leaving the room, and yet in leaving it leaves more than it takes. The mantle falls, not from heaven exactly, more like from a life finishing well. It lands where Elisha can reach it, which is where he has always been close. He tears his clothes, grief making room for inheritance, and picks up the garment that once startled him in a field. It weighs different now. Not heavier, truer. He walks back to the river he just crossed as a student and begins his first exam as a steward. Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah? Not where is Elijah, that ache he saves for later. He strikes the water. It parts. The river answers to the same voice through a new mouth. Sons of the prophets watch from a distance and say the obvious. The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha. Titles can be stolen. Authority cannot. It is recognized by obedience and fruit. This is not the end of Elisha's story. Only this chapter's hinge. There will be more oil, more rooms, more rescues, hard prophecies, and one last miracle that breaks the frame of endings. Years later, when Elisha is bones in a tomb and raiders interrupt a funeral, mourners toss a body into the cave. It brushes the prophet's remains, and the man revives, staggers out, gasping life, tripping over itself to prove a final point. God's power outlives our pulse. Mantles rot. The Spirit does not. Where does the whirlwind leave us? With two charges. First, to every Elijah, throw the mantle before the chariot comes. Don't clutch the roll so tight the next generation has to pry it from your fingers. Give access now. Tell the stories. Let younger hands carry weight while you can still coach their grip. The measure of your ministry is not your last miracle. It's the strength of those who walk after you. Second, to every Elisha, ask for the hard portion and expect it to feel heavy before it feels heroic. Burn the yokes, then bear the weight. Stay near enough to see cry honest when you lose and strike the water anyway. Your question at the river is the prayer that keeps mantles from becoming museums. Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah? Answer right here, faithful as ever, asking only for trust that keeps moving when mentors are gone. The camera lingers on the Jordan closing, where so many beginnings have opened. On one bank, dust settling in a circle, where a whirlwind once stood. On the other, footprints leading toward a town that will soon need a spring healed and a people steadied. Over both banks, the same sky that watched Elijah run ahead of rain now watches Elisha walk into a future that belongs to God more than to any man's name. Succession is holy work. If you lead, release your mantle on purpose. If you follow, pick it up with tears and courage. God's power doesn't retire, it relocates to faithful hands.